Hi everyone. Today we're going to be covering the last of the features. We're going to be going over the ear. So we'll briefly talk about the proportions of the ear and a little bit of an overview of the anatomy of the external portion of the ear. We won't go into the internal workings of the ear, just the artistic purposes, the visual purposes. So to begin with, we'll just talk briefly about this. A good way to think of how to draw the ear in general is to think of it as a capital letter C. Another way that can be helpful to think of when you're drawing the ear is to think of the overall shape of a seashell. A seashell or a capital letter C. I tend to use the capital letter C, and it always will get you the basic overall shape fairly quickly, and it'll end up being pretty accurate. So here we've taken a capital letter C and just done it in reverse. And the anatomy, this large or this kind of tubular portion that wraps around here is known as the helix, this section all right through here. This little section that's in the middle here, I like to think of it as a capital letter Y. If you always just think of a letter Y, you'll get that shape fairly well. And that is the antihelix. So we have the helix here on the outside. We have the antihelix on the inside. There's always a little process in here where it has a little outer area, wider area, that's known as a tubercle. And it's frequently referred to as Darwin's tubercle. So that portion in here, you always want to make sure that you get that little extra shape right in here. So it's not just a perfectly round tubular shape. It does have this tubercle in here. The section that's in the middle here, that's somewhat bowl-like, and it's the hard portion of our ear that helps to gather the sound to take it into our auditory meatus. This section here is known as the concha. So that whole inner bowl-like area is known as the concha. Then we come down and there's kind of a hard process through here. This is known as the antitragus. This section here, this bony portion right here, actually it's not bony, it's cartilage, but that is the tragus. And then the lobe of our ear where you would likely have a piercing, this is known as the lobule. So that is the general makeup of the ear. And as we can see here from a direct back view, this concha area in here, this hard portion, we see that large portion through here on the back side of the ear. This section here, the rounded tubular portion is the helix. We can also see that here from the back. And then you can see where this little area in here is a little bit wider. That is the tubercle. Then we have down here, we have the lobule. In the back, the bone here, our skeletal structure, which the ear connects onto. This portion is known as the mastoid process. And then the sternocleidomastoid muscle, our powerful neck muscle, would come through here. And if we were going to draw it, then the trapezius muscle would also come in here, which is one of our back muscles. It comes up and it attaches to the occipital portion of the skull. So here is the mastoid process, the concha, the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Then on the lower portion of our ear, that's the lobe, the lobule, the tubercle, and then the helix. So we see all of those proportions. What I did here is I broke this down so that you can kind of get, basically when you're drawing the human head, you want to think that the nose falls into the middle third in the proportions. When we draw the egg-shaped oval, the overall egg-shaped oval of the head, we break it into thirds. We have the top third, which is the forehead, the middle third, which is where our nose would fall, and then the bottom third is which the mouth would fall. So the nose and the ears both fall into the middle third. So you always want to remember that the base here of the ear should be at the base of the nose. So it fits directly into that middle third. The ear itself can be broken into thirds. So the portion here of the antihelix that connects and runs through would fit into the, basically, if you always think that the concha it always, the bowl shape, it fits into the middle third of the ear. So the top portion here of the antitragus and the bottom of the lobe, this is the bottom third. The concha area is the middle third, and in the base here of the antihelix goes to the top of the ear, the top of the helix. So that is the top third. So it's kind of cool how so much of the human figure can be broken down into the law of thirds. So what I thought I'd do here is I'll shade one ear, and then I'll do the other ears in a time lapse so you can see them all fully shaded and how that process works. But in general, just keep in mind that it's a capital letter C or a letter C, doesn't always have to be a capital, or it can think of it as a seashell shape for the basic overall outer shape of the ear. Here you can see it's almost definitely like a C, but then the lobe hangs down a little bit lower. This is a child's ear. It's not fully developed. This is a little bit of an older person's ear. So there's a variety here, and you can see how with a variety of ears, things change a little bit. But now just a little bit to relate it to art and shading purposes, you want to think of the lobe of the ear as somewhat like a sphere. So if light's coming from above on this side, the core shadow is going to fall through here and through here and the helix. And now we're going to have reflected light underneath. And as we run through here, we want to have the core shadow running all the way down this side and reflected light. So you can see where all these principles of shading will apply, but as you start doing a variety of forms, they all vary to keep in line with the particular form in which you're shading. And then always right underneath the lobe of the ear, we have a cast shadow. And remember, the cast shadow should have the same value as the core shadow. So if I make this out to have this amount of darkness, I want to make sure that my core shadow has the same amount of darkness. Then right underneath here, we have this cartilaginous portion, and I'm going to have a core shadow in here, so it's like another little area. And then we have a little bit of a cast shadow underneath. And coming through here, we have the bottom portion of the antihelix in here. And this wraps around, so we want to have a little bit of a tone on this other side. A little bit of a tone here on the antihelix with a cast shadow in that groove. And the tragus, or the antitragus in here, so it forms this, and this is a hard cartilage shape through here, so we want to have that little bit of a tone and soften that area. And then the tragus always is actually very much like a sphere. So it has core shadow, reflected light, and there's going to be a highlight somewhere right in here. And this portion here is going to have where it connects onto the side of the head, has a little bit of a tone. And then all of this right here is also the helix, and it has a little bit of a tone coming through here. Remember, light's going to come through this way, so I want to have a core shadow and core shadow through here with reflected light underneath. We want it to make it look like it's sculptural, three-dimensional. And then it's going to come and it's going to blend in here, but all of this is going to kind of fall into shadow. So I'll put a light tone over all of that. And then remember here, this is the antihelix, and it's like a capital letter Y. And this is going to have a core shadow with reflected light underneath. Right through there. And then this generally is going to have a tone. Some people it's darker and more bowl-like in here. Some people it's a little bit more flat. That's where you have to look at the character and age of the individual on which you're drawing. And then this portion of the helix cast a shadow onto this portion of the antihelix. And I want to make sure I put a tone on this side of the helix. Remember, light has to remain inside the form. Light should not be on the edges. So we want to put a tone through here, tone through there. And the top part of the helix is going to have a tone. Want all the light running through the middle. And then there's a little bit of a tone here, a little bit of tone through there. The auditory meatus, which is our ear canal, this is always very dark in here. So, because it's what goes inside to our ear canal. And then the concha has a little bit of a tone in here. This comes forward. This will be placed behind, going to the dark area of the ear canal. And a tone over the concha. And then this portion will have some light on it here of the antihelix. There's going to be a little bit of light through here. And we want to have a half tone placed on this inner side. Actually, we'll make a core shadow so with reflected light so that it separates it a little bit more from the concha. Cast shadow from the antihelix onto the concha. And remember, the core shadow and the cast shadow have to be the same value. And all of this where it's going to go under is going to have a little bit of a tone. And let's lighten up a little bit here so we can see the top portion, which is known as the superior portion of the antihelix. The top portion of the Y is the superior border. The lower section here is the inferior border of the antihelix. And so now we just want to soften all of that. So again, here the antitragus, I want to make sure that this top portion here has a core shadow. Then there's a little cast shadow right underneath it so that it comes forward. And then that the antihelix connects behind. This is a separate piece of cartilage through here. And we want to make sure we get this rounded area of the tragus. That's kind of an important landmark when drawing the figure. Then we might have some folds here where the ear connects onto the head. And then this portion of the helix where it comes in and connects is going to have a little bit of a tone. So let's just clean that up a tiny bit. we can. So the top portion of the ear will have a highlight. This section of the antihelix will have a highlight. Usually the tubercle, the top portion in there, may have a bit of a highlight. The lobe of the ear is always going to have a highlight. This will have a tone where it comes down here to the mandible. And there's always a cast shadow underneath the lobe of the ear that sits onto the neck. So now we'll add, just real quickly here, we'll add a few highlights. So this portion of the antihelix is going to have a highlight. This section through here. The tragus is going to have a highlight. The antitragus, this almost always has a highlight through there. The lobule, and this part of the lobe. And then the top portion of the helix, sometimes through here there's a bit. And then right here on the tubercle, the top portion of the tubercle might have a highlight. And this portion of the antihelix usually has a highlight. Sometimes there's a little bit of light in here on the concha. It depends on the lighting and the area in which the head is turned. And then this, where it connects in here, will be a little softer. So let me just make that connection a little clearer and a little more subtle. So you can see when it's how important it is to learn all the elements of shading. So we have the highlight, we have the halftone, we have the core shadow, or actually we have highlight, light, halftone, core shadow, reflected light, and cast shadow, just as if we were shading the sphere or the cylinder. Here, right through here, we have this core shadow, we have reflected light underneath, we have halftone, and this area has light. This area has light. It may not necessarily have a highlight on this portion because not all of the ear is going to fall into an area where it has a distinct highlight. And all of this is probably going to go in. It wraps around into the ear. So let's do that and make this cast shadow a little bit more bold through there. And I want to soften that just a tiny bit through here. But it's going to have a light, but it's not going to have a highlight through here. And then this fold and these folds of fleshy folds of the skin are going to connect to from the face to the ear. And this one actually might have a highlight. And so that's the elements of shading combined with the anatomy of the ear. So remember to start with a letter C, and then think of the proportions where you can break it down into 3 equal parts. The top third ends just below the bottom portion of the antihelix. The middle third basically contains the whole concha shape, which is the bowl shape of the ear. And then the bottom third begins at the top of the antitragus and ends at the bottom of the lobule. And if you stick with those proportions, you'll always have a relatively good ear. The fun part about ears is everybody, depending on their age and gender, in particular age, the structure of the ear can really change over time. So it can be fascinating to cover ears. Frequently, not a lot of time is spent with ears because depending on the person you're drawing, ears are oftentimes covered with hair or hats or other things, so you don't always get to see the ear. But the ear is really fascinating. So I will now shade the other ears using time lapse so that you can see what they're all like when they are shaded. I hope you find this helpful. And just remember to keep in mind, drawing an ear is simple if you just use the letter C. Now for the time lapse.